The Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association, David Taylor.
David, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Central to the conservative ethos is the dignity of work. We believe it is important to apply one's God-given talents to live a complete and meaningful life. This is why welfare reform was so important, to restore dignity to as many Americans as possible by changing incentives in favor of work. Our friend Rick Santorum led that fight and won it for a time. As the radical expansion of Social Security disability shows, no policy victory is ever permanent. But Rick is continuing his efforts along those lines, fighting for a pro-growth, pro-jobs agenda for working America. It's a great honor to welcome home my friend, Rick Santorum.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Taylor. It's great to be back here at PLC, and it's so great to see this room full with enthusiastic folks. Good to see you, Mr. Anton, and all of my friends here in Pennsylvania. It is great to be here, and it's great to be here at a time that is as critical as any time I think we've seen in our nation's history. We look around America and we just sort of scratch our head and see what's going on, obviously around the world, and what's happening in Central Europe, and what's happening in Southeast Asia and the Middle East, Central Asia and the Middle East. And now we look at what's happening here in this country with Obamacare and the deficits and the cultural unrest that we have in our country. And we think America is changing. I would make the argument America has changed. Why is it changing? I think the answer is pretty simple. If you look at the numbers, 40%, between 35 and 40% of the people in this country self-identify themselves as conservative. This has been the case for the past 30 or 40 years. Look on the other side. Between 15 and 20% of the people in this country self-identify themselves as liberal. So roughly, there are twice as many people who I see themselves as conservative and identify with conservative principles than identify with the other side. But we're losing ground. Why is that happening? Well, let's start in a couple of places. Let's look first at politics. If you look at what the Republican establishment would have us believe, in order for us to win elections, we have to become more like the 20%. That's how we win. We move to the 20% instead of nominating candidates who stand with the 40+% of Americans. That's why we lose. They're unafraid to stand and fight. They go out and try to shape the American public, and they're doing it. They're doing it politically. Barack Obama didn't run a race the last time around to the middle. He ran hardcore. He stood for all the things that the Democratic platform stood by. But we have now sequentially nominated candidates who apologize for much of the Republican platform and refuse to go on the offensive as to why it's the right course for our country, and then we wonder why we lose. Ladies and gentlemen, your group is important. The conservative movement is important in this state. It's important across this country. But one of the reasons we are not winning is because we are not doing our job. One of my favorite stories is a story about G.K. Chesterton was asked by a London publication at the turn of the last century to write an essay on what's wrong with the world. That was the title of it. 2 days later, he submitted his essay, and the essay read, "What's wrong with the world? I am." Sincerely, respectfully submitted, G.K. Chesterton. The bottom line is, they're winning. They're moving the political landscape because they want it more than we do. They're willing to fight harder than we are. They're working every day in the courts, in businesses, in organizations, in school boards, in unions, everywhere. They are working hard because they want to, in the president's words, transform America. And they're winning because so many of that 40% just assume everything's going to get better. Things are going to swing back. Everything's going to change. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a lie we can no longer afford to tell ourselves. So what's the answer? Well, politically, obviously there's a political group, so let's talk about that. Let's look at what the Republican Party has been out there talking about and saying this is our chance to win. Look, I want to win. I've won and I've lost. I like winning more. And when I ran for president, not the most logical thing to do after you lose a race in Pennsylvania by an historic margin. But 4 years later, I decided after that loss to run for president of the United States. I can tell you there weren't a whole lot of people encouraging me to run. In fact, the only person I can really think about was my 13-year-old daughter, Sarah Maria. Now, I have 6 other children, by the way. But she encouraged me to run. 3 months after I announced, she recanted. And so it wasn't like a whole throng of people out there saying, Santorum, you should run. But I felt that I needed to go out there and communicate a message. And contrary to what you heard, maybe here in Pennsylvania, the message, yes, was on being a strong, principled conservative. But I talked about issues that related to average Americans. You see, I think the problem of the Republican Party is if you think of our message is cut taxes for high-income individuals, cut benefits for low-income individuals, and balance the budget. Now, I'm not necessarily opposed to those principles, but it's a lousy message because you're leaving out a whole bunch of people in the middle who, when you talk, say, what about me? Where do I come into any of this? Well, that's what our campaign was about. We went out there and talked about messages that those of us who were in the middle of America could relate to. We painted a picture that after painting that picture, you could look at that picture and say, oh yeah, there I am in that picture. See, that's the problem with our movement is that we are so stuck on policies, we forget to talk about people. The bottom line is, there was the most key statistic in the last presidential election on the exit polls, was that 22 or 23% of the people in this country voted for president, and the most important issue to them was, does he care about people like me? And on that question, Mitt Romney lost 81-19. Why? Because we didn't talk about people like them. So how do we change that? Well, we have to recognize that there are a lot of people out there who are not like us. We end up, as Republicans, talking to job creators all the time. That's our message. It's job creation, small businesses. All those are good things. But most of Americans are not job creators. Most Americans are not small business people or corporate CEOs. They're job holders. I'll give you an example. During the convention, I spoke on Tuesday night at the National Convention. And at that event, I walked into the hall before the convention. I saw all these placards on the seats. And there were signs that said, "We built that." Now, you may remember during the campaign, President Obama talked about how he had made this huge gaffe and said, wow, you didn't build that. And this became a central theme for the Romney campaign. And so that night, they were going to make that the theme of the convention. I went backstage, and I got a chance to meet all of these people who were going to come up and talk. They were a wonderful array of small and medium and large business people. And one after another, they went out there and talked about how they had built their business. But how about the idea of 2 people walking out on stage? One of them, a server at a restaurant, who would start out and describe their job and how they were thankful for the job they have because of the sacrifice that someone who had built this company. And talk about the person who had built this company and how thankful they were for the sacrifice, the time and effort that she had put into building this restaurant. And then for the restaurateur to walk over and put her arm around the server and say, I want to thank him for the great work because I wouldn't be a successful company without having this great worker at my side. That's unity. You see, the other side divides. The other side pits the worker versus the business person, and they choose the worker. But we seem to pit the business person versus the worker, and that's not a very good vote analysis. It also isn't true. It also isn't who we are. Aren't we a party that wants not just people who work 16 hours a day, 7 days a week to grab the brass ring, but don't we want to be the party that says to the guy or gal who works 9 to 5 and goes home, takes care of their children, and works at the library or volunteers at school or runs the local Girl Scout troop or coaches the Little League baseball, works at church? Aren't those people part of our coalition? Aren't those people valuable to us as Americans? The answer is, of course they are. That's what makes America great. Yes, job creators, but community builders, not just job builders. Family builders, not just business builders. That's what I went out and talked to folks about. I talked about the importance of manufacturing, talking about the 70% of people in this country who aren't going to graduate from college. That's right, 70% of Americans do not have a college degree. And if you listen to either of the parties, who's talking about opportunities for them in America, not just to have a job, but to have some security and stability and a chance to move up and provide for their families? Who's talking about the importance of our culture, and particularly the issue of marriage and the family? You know, I get pinned with that a lot. You know, Santorum, you're always out there talking about the family. Yeah, for good reason. The family is the basic building block of society, and if the family crumbles, society falls. There were a whole bunch of studies. I don't know if you saw this or not. The Obama administration is really big on income inequality right now. They're trying to make this election about it. They've had some inconvenient things come out in the last few months that show that this argument is a little bit of a ruse. But what these studies have shown, and they're out of Harvard and Berkeley and places like that, not exactly conservative bastions, and what they've shown is that the number one determiner of economic status in America, the most influential thing, is whether you're married or not. Whether you are married and in a stable relationship or not. Families matter. If you look at the word economy, it comes from oikos, the Greek word for home. The first economy is the home. We as Republicans shouldn't be ashamed to go out, and conservatives, and talk about the importance of marriage. I'm not talking about redefining marriage. I'm talking about reclaiming marriage, of a man and a woman raising children in our home, which is a good and healthy thing for society and for our economy. We need to reclaim that. We need to promote it. If you think about what we do, there's a lot of talk recently about Obamacare and its disincentive to work. True. Because of all of these subsidies, that if you end up working more, you lose your subsidy and it costs you more money. And that was a big eye-opener for folks. Oh, wow, this is really terrible. It's discouraging work. Well, let's look at all the other welfare programs that are out there. Every single one of them discourages people to work. The more money you make, the less you get. But they do something else. They also discourage you from forming a family. I was in Wisconsin, and a good friend of mine, a state senator, Glenn Grothman, wrote up a long study and showed that if you're a single mother in Wisconsin, I suspect it's similar here in Pennsylvania. If you're a single mother in Wisconsin earning $15,000 a year and you have 2 children, you are eligible in the state of Wisconsin for $38,000 in welfare benefits. If you were to marry, you'd lose them all. Your husband would have to make $50,000 a year just to break even. The government is discouraging marriage. The government has discouraged family formation, fathers taking responsibility for their children that they have out of wedlock. Why? Because if you get married, it costs money. These are all well-meaning things, but they're destructive. They're destructive for families, for fathers, for mothers, and for children. And we need to talk about these things. You know why? Because there are millions of Americans who see the reality of this in their life, and no one mentions it. No one is trying to help them. No one is talking about them. I'm not saying at all that we abandon any one of our principles. In fact, I think we need to embrace them fully and be unafraid to go out there and articulate them boldly. But that means all of the things we believe in. We have become a party trying to fly on one wing, all on economics, and we're flying spiraling down. It doesn't work because America isn't just an economic engine and people aren't just economic beings. We need to talk about all of the issues that are important and talk it with a positive, uplifting message that is inclusive of the very people that we say we care about. Ladies and gentlemen, this is an opportunity for us. It's an opportunity because the president and his policies have been proven to be what we knew they would be, failures. Liberalism doesn't work. It hasn't worked anywhere in the world. It's not going to work here. But we must have a vision and alternative. So when we go into Pennsylvania and we ask for folks who are not small business people to support us, we have to have a message that says we care about you and we're talking about you. This is a great opportunity for us to paint a positive vision, to talk about moral and cultural issues, not in the divisive sense that they've been talked about before, but in a uniting sense. I had the opportunity to do that during the campaign, even on the issue of life. It came up in a very odd way, but in a way it was so reassuring to me. It was during the campaign, you may recall, I had to go home. I was home for a very short period of time during the Florida primary, and I went home because I had to release my taxes. Mitt Romney had just released his taxes. Not that anybody necessarily wanted to see my taxes. I wasn't the big money maker that people were concerned about, but I hadn't released mine, and so the press was asking me, so I thought, okay, unlike everybody else, I don't have an accountant. I do my own taxes on TurboTax. I figured if you're going to pass laws on taxes, you should have to do your taxes. And so I went home to release my taxes, and that day, my daughter Bella had gotten sick. And that night, she got very, very ill overnight. We couldn't keep her oxygen levels up. She wasn't breathing. She was dying. And so we had to rush her to the hospital. Now, I had just lost the South Carolina primary. I had lost New Hampshire. Yes, I'd won Iowa, but it was 2 weeks afterwards that they announced I'd won, and some people really didn't even know I won that. And here I was in Florida, trailing in third place. And so, of course, I was going to the hospital and stay with my daughter. I wasn't going to go back to Florida anywhere else. And so, but we had to make an announcement of what to do. And I said, well, we're going to suspend the campaign. And they said, well, you just can't suspend the campaign. Everybody think you drop it out. We didn't want to mention Bella because we had seen what the press had done to Sarah Palin and her son Trig. And we didn't want Bella to be the point of the nasty left. But we felt we had to say something. And plus, we were worried. And we wanted people to pray for her. So we asked people to pray for her and told her that she was sick and that we would resume the campaign when she was better. We went to the hospital and they took an x-ray, and her x-rays showed that both of her lungs were filled with fluid. She had pneumonia. Last time she had pneumonia, she had to be put on a ventilator for 5 weeks. She almost died many times. And so we sat around the hotel bedside after a blurring months of being on the campaign trail, and we prayed and we had quiet time. And we watched Bella, and we just assumed eventually she was going to have to be on a ventilator and things were going to go downhill, but she didn't. As the day wore on, the night wore on, we thought, oh, it's going to get worse at night. It always does, and she didn't. Later in the night, as we were up all night with her, she was actually felt like she was getting better. The next morning, they did an x-ray, and her lungs were perfectly clear. That just doesn't happen to little kids with trisomy 18. It doesn't happen, but it did. We sat long and hard and we thought about whether to go back on the trail, whether maybe this was a sign, but when we saw that, we thought, okay, let's get back out there. And instead of going back to Florida, we decided to go to pass up Las Vegas. I mean, Nevada, Vegas and I don't necessarily, it's probably not a great match, me and Vegas. And so we decided to go to Missouri, Colorado, and Minnesota. And the first event I went to was in St. Charles County, St. Charles County, Missouri, outside of St. Louis. I remember driving up there, was at a community college. And the events I had been having in Florida, they were okay attended, but there's not huge crowds or raucous crowds. And so when I drove up and I saw these people outside the building, I thought, I said to my aide, I said, look, someone's got to get the building open. Obviously, people aren't getting into the building. And I walked there and the building was open. The gym, the auditorium was full, and these were all people piled outside. I couldn't understand what was going on. But then I figured it out. I got into the auditorium, and I'll never forget standing there and looking over, and there was a man, tall man. He had a little girl on his shoulders. The little girl had Down syndrome. Down syndrome is trisomy 21. It's an extra 21st chromosome. Bella has an extra 18th chromosome. Much more severe condition than Down's. But that little Down syndrome girl was up on his shoulder. She's about 4 or 5 years old. And she was holding a sign. And the sign said, "I'm for Bella's dad." Everywhere I went, crowds were big, but they were filled with a lot of people, many of them in wheelchairs, disabled, in a variety of different ways. But they identified with someone who stood for life, not in the way that politicians stand for life, but in the way a dad stands for life. It touched people. It made a difference. It showed me throughout the course of the campaign, and even afterwards as people I talked to, it's still today. When I meet someone at a cab driver or someone going through an airport or whatever, the first question I almost always get is, "How's your daughter doing?" People saw the truth. People with disabilities came. Why? Because they were heartened by the fact that someone stepped away from running for the most powerful position on earth to take care of a disabled child. That they were just important as everybody else. Of course they are. But society doesn't always see it that way. They see the lie, not the truth. We stand for the truth. Like, don't doubt that. Don't doubt that Americans don't see that. They don't always admit to it. It's hard to admit to the truth sometimes. It's inconvenient. But ladies and gentlemen, at a vulnerable moment, when they see it, they know it. We have to be less in your face and more living it out. I want to share with you an article that was written right after that happened. By the way, I ended up winning those 3 states. And all of a sudden, I was the lead candidate to get the Republican nomination, winning in the polls. And of course, as soon as that happened, all the opposition research in the world came tumbling down on us. Everything I'd ever said, and you know me from Pennsylvania, I've said a lot of things. Not all of them the smartest thing in the world. But I said a lot of things and did a lot of things. And they all came piling out. And I'll never forget one in particular was I gave a speech back in 2008 at Ave Maria University where I talked about how Satan was attacking the United States. Oh my goodness. When that was reported, all day long, reporter after reporter came up to me with the exact same question. Standing in front of me with a microphone, incredulous. Do you actually believe in Satan? Yes. Next, do you actually believe in Satan? Yes, Jesus did. It's good enough for me. If he believes in it, then I can believe in him. Incredulous. But all of those things kept pounding away. And there was an article written by a guy named Joe Klein during this time. Joe Klein is a liberal writer wrote for the New York Times, wrote for the New Yorker, now writes for Time magazine, been around a long time. He wrote the book Primary Colors, if you may recall that. If you don't know Joe Klein, if you don't know his persuasion, he's a regular on MSNBC. That should nip it in the bud right there. So Joe writes this article while all of this is stirring. And he says, it's called Rick Santorum's Inconvenient Truths. Bob Schieffer of CBS News is the gold standard for sane and solid in American TV journalism. And on the morning of February 19th, 2012, he was clearly nonplussed by extreme statements Rick Santorum had made about prenatal testing and public schools and the president's position on the environment. So, Senator, Schieffer began, I've got to ask you, what in the world are you talking about, sir? At such a moment, the overwhelming majorities of American politicians would hem and haw and go on the defensive and respond with, what I really meant to say was, but not Santorum. He didn't seem at all flustered. He vigorously restated the positions he had taken, and in some cases eloquently. He had especially vigorous defense of prenatal testing, citing studies that showed that 90% of Down syndrome babies are aborted. Schieffer asked whether Santorum wanted to turn back the clock on science and ban such testing. No, Santorum replied. The federal government, though, should not be promoting and paying for procedures in Obamacare like amniocentesis, which are used for the purpose of identifying children who are disabled and in most cases end up by eliminating them by abortions. Santorum has become, he continues, the inconvenient candidate even for those who agree with him. These are delicate issues to be handled delicately. The Right to Life movement has been particularly clever and disciplined, changing public opinion over the last 20 years, going after the most egregious outliers like so-called partial birth abortion. It also has gotten a major boost from science, ironically, as sonograms have made it impossible to deny that from a very early stage, that thing in the womb is a human life. In the days after the Schieffer interview, audio was unearthed of a 2008 Santorum speech in which he seemed to argue for the literal existence of Satan. And then he goes on for about 2 paragraphs and hammers me on Satan. I'll skip that. Then he concludes by saying, and yet when you leave Satan aside, okay, let's leave Satan aside. There's something admirable about Santorum's near Tourettic insistence on bringing up issues no one else wants to talk about. His position on education, that parents need to spend more time supervising their children's education, draws stifling groans from overworked parents. But he's right. Parents know best how their children learn. His emphasis on the importance of intact families is undoubtedly correct as well. Every major study since the 1960s has shown the disaster that results from out-of-wedlock births. Even Santorum's use of prenatal testing raises uncomfortable issues for many people. It was a sonogram that helped determine that the Santorum son, Gabriel, needed microsurgery in the womb to clear his bladder. Karen and Rick decided to fight for Gabriel's life, which nearly cost Karen her own. And they passionately embraced his life during the 2 hours he lived on earth. They spent the last 3 years caring for their daughter, Isabella, whose genetic defect, trisomy 18, is an early death sentence. Almost 100% of trisomy 18 children are encouraged to be aborted. Yet I'm haunted by the smiling photos I've seen of Isabella with her father, mother, brothers, and sisters. No doubt she struggled through many of the days. She nearly died a few weeks ago. But she's also been granted of 3 years of unconditional love and the ability to smile and bring joy. Her tenuous survival has given her family a deeper sense of how precious even the frailest of lives are. All right, I can hear you saying the Santorum family's course may have been admirable, but shouldn't we have the right to make our own choices? Yes, I suppose. But I also worry that we've become too averse to personal inconvenience as a society. That we're less rigorous parents than we should be particularly for the disabled, farming out our responsibilities to the state. So I'm grateful. I'm grateful for Santorum for forcing on me the discomfort of having to think about the moral implications of his daughter's smile. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to encourage you. Don't doubt that we hold the truth. We don't doubt that we hold the truth on the key to a healthy culture. Don't doubt that we hold the truth on a key to a healthy economy. Don't doubt that we hold the truth on how to have a safe and stable America and world. Our platform, our ideals, the conservative principles are tried and true. They work. Let's not be afraid to nominate people who articulate that vision boldly. Americans are desperate for leaders. We feel like we're being buffeted around and we have a president who's clueless. They want someone out there who believes what they say and has a vision for this country that is inclusive of them, all of us. People ask me all the time, Rick, what can I do? And the answer is very simple. Something. Do something. Whether it's in politics, in your family, at your school, at your church. Frankly, it should be everyone. In your business, every place. You know why? Because they do. They fight. They fight every day. And we don't. Oh, there may be some of you out here who do, thanks be to God, there are. But as a movement, we do not. That's why your businesses has policies that you don't agree with, and you just put up with it. That's why your school has textbooks that you don't agree with, and you just put up with it. That's why your church and your pastor doesn't preach the God, you just put up with it. They don't put up with it. How did America become America? Because we had the strongest, most powerful army in the world, the best navy, that's how we beat the British? No. We won because we wanted it more than they did. And we were willing to sacrifice whatever it took. We will lose our freedom the same way the British lost this country because we simply didn't want it enough to fight for it. I know I'm speaking to the choir. You're here because you care. But if America is going to be that shining city on the hill again, each and every one of us, in every aspect of our lives, has to do something, and do it now. And if we do, we got the numbers on our side, folks. America can and will be great again. God bless you.